closing days of Victorians who, after 111 days of lockdown last year, might be asking, how is it the case that the government still lacks such confidence in the hotel quarantine systems and contact tracing that you apparently can't manage 2 to 3 cases of COVID a day in a population of about 6.3 million people?
Well, you've made a number of assertions there, and
They're all facts, actually.
well, no, they're not. You've just put it to me that there's a lack of confidence. Absolutely, I'm more than confident in the team we have and in the Victorian community that they can get through this. So with the greatest of respect, you have put a number of things to me that are not accurate.
But if you have confidence in the system, which your own bureaucrat actually just explained, frankly, is working quite well, why do you need a lockdown?
Well, because the public health advice to me is that given the speed with which this moves, given the assumption that has to guide the decision making, much as it would have, I'm sure, guided decision making to close the northern beaches in Sydney or Brisbane or Perth or Adelaide, where there's been similar issues coming out of hotel quarantine. The public health advice is particularly with this UK strain, and just the other day we put up on the screen a number of charts that demonstrated that despite enormous numbers of people coming forward and getting tested, and indeed despite tests being processed quickly, contact tracing being done well above the national standard, that is what is expected of all of us, close contacts had been infected by the time we became aware of the primary case. That is the definition of something moving fast.
But the data, Premier, that we were just provided you showed that they were contacts, they were really well identified.
Well, not all of them actually. Some of them have come into scope.
They've been well identified and pinned down. The hospitals aren't in any danger of being overwhelmed. It's a small number of cases. That all suggests that the system is actually working pretty well to contain it. So why the need for lockdown?
Well, that's a very different question to the one that you asked at the beginning, where you contended that there were all sorts of confidence issues.
Well, I'm going based on what you said on the weekend that a lockdown was needed because contact tracers could not keep up with the spread of the UK variant, which would imply that you lack confidence.
No, that's not what it implies at all. That's not what it implies at all. What it implies and what it actually states is that this thing's moving really fast. That shouldn't be taken as a criticism of thousands of people who are working night and day and are pulling this up. I suppose I'll put it to you this way, Leigh, if you're putting it to me that I ought to ignore the advice that's provided to me by the Chief Health Officer, well, I will not do that. Just like I'm sure each and every other Premier who across the state has had to go to these short, sharp circuit breaker lockdowns, they didn't ignore the advice of their public health teams, nor has Prime Minister Ardern in New Zealand ignored the advice of her public health team. You know, I don't know, I really wouldn't think that you would want a situation where, for the sake of being popular or the sake of avoiding the real challenges that are faced by making these sorts of decisions, you ignored that advice, only to be back here in a fortnight answering a whole lot of different questions about why I'd ignored advice. I just don't do that.
But what's the circuit that you're breaking? Because your own expert just made it clear what a good job's being done in terms of containment and tracing. So
I'm not sure. That line of questioning follows that it'd be better if there was a heap more cases.
No, I'm just saying that
it doesn't make much sense to me.
Not a lot of spread in your community.
Well, yes, but this is the whole thing. You have to always, and I would have thought this is a pretty clear point, and I've made this point literally thousands of times. You have to assume, just like epidemiologists, public health experts, and political leaders across the globe, you have to assume there are more cases out there than you know about, because if you assume otherwise, and you are proven wrong, then there's no going back. There's no do-over. You don't get to go, well, I'll just rewind these 2 weeks and make the decision that the officials told me to make that I refuse to make.
So are you going to put the state into a 5-day lockdown every time you have 2 or 3 new cases a day?
Well, as I was just saying, we'll look at every positive case on its merits, but we would always work as hard as we possibly can to avoid having any statewide measures, any extra rules. But look, this is...
Hard news for Victorians to take, but 2 to 3 cases a day, the system may not be able to handle it. That's on the table, but 1 and a 5-day lockdown every time.
Well, again, I think it's important to acknowledge that when you use terms like the system may not be able to handle it, this is not the 2020 virus. This is a very different virus, and if you want to look at systems that can't handle things, well, have a look at Europe. Have a look at so many parts of the world. They're dealing with what happens when this UK strain runs wild. There's just no pulling it up. And particularly when you get so close, and we've seen some very encouraging announcements overnight from the Commonwealth Government in relation to the vaccine rollout. And we look forward to playing our part in that. However we can help, we're there to do the very best we possibly can. When you're so close to having frontline workers and particularly vulnerable Victorians getting that jab, we've got to hold these settings. We've got to protect what we've built, and that's exactly what we've done based on advice. And far from, I think, being criticised for having followed advice and seeing low case numbers because people are working their guts out and doing a very good job, I think that's a far preferable outcome than having more cases. You always want less.
If snap lockdowns are going to continue to be a tool and option for a small number of cases, how can Victorian businesses make any regular planning, let alone investment planning?
Well, again, I'm not accepting, and I think it's just wrong to say that they're a tool for a small number of cases as such. They're a tool, yeah, and also I think about 14 times made the point, Leigh, that every case on its merits. So I think we're sort of anyway, I'm putting it to you that we will always reserve the right to look at individual cases and to follow the advice that is given to us. And I just don't think you wouldn't want it any other way, because the notion, let's just go back to first principles here. If I'm, would you really want me to be shopping around for the best advice, the most politically popular advice? Would you really want me to say, oh, well, gee, that'll be incredibly hard? And I'm not doubting that for a moment, how hard it is. I'm not prepared to do that.
Not at all, I'm just, what I'm trying to get to is, obviously, as you agree, lockdowns impose a real cost on the community. Victorians have already paid a really high price because of the long lockdown last year. Your own team has made it clear that the cases are actually very well traced, managed and contained.
Yes.
So why have we needed to resort to the harsh measure of a lockdown?
Well, I think I've already gone through that a number of times, and I went through that on Friday for a best part of two hours. I'm happy to do it again, but again, the types of cases, this UK strain, the fact that despite the amazing efforts of all of our contact tracers and testers and path lab workers and the work of so many genuine hard-working Victorians, we had a situation where at the same time as we're becoming aware of the primary case, they've already infected their close contacts. That's not something we've seen before. The speed at which this has moved saw our public health team make the very difficult decisions based on the best of science and the best understanding you can possibly have of any outbreak, that this was a difficult but a proportionate and necessary thing to do. And look, I would, if at the end of this, the view of you or others is that this was too much, well, you're free to form those views. What I am not free to do is to ignore advice and have a situation where I sort of shop around for whatever will be most popular, only then to be proven wrong and to have not one or two cases, but something much worse than that, and particularly on the cusp of the vaccine being rolled out. I know and appreciate very well what Victorians have been able to achieve. There's no other jurisdiction in the world that has been able to achieve what we have achieved. It is a credit to the character and the compassion and the absolute determination of the Victorian community. We know what to do, and I'm so grateful that that's exactly what Victorians are doing, coming forward and getting tested, listening to the public health advice that is given to them, following the rules, and also when they're asked to make that incredibly difficult decision, or the very challenging thing to do, to stay at home for 14 days, on the chance that you may have it, to do that at such high levels, it is a credit to every single Victorian.